Hi everyone, how you doing? My name is Jeff Aaron and I'm head of marketing over here at MIST. And I am fortunate enough to have Chuck Curry, who's Director of Information Technology and Services over at Guilford College. And we have a great webinar here for you guys. What we're going to talk about is titled The Journey to the Modern Wireless Cloud, where I'm going to talk a little bit about the MIST solution and how we've kind of changed the wireless game, so to speak, using the modern cloud and AI and some of the things that we do around Wi-Fi with assurance and Bluetooth Low Energy. But perhaps most importantly, we have Chuck, who's also here and ready to talk. Chuck is a new MIST customer, and he had the good fortune of doing the evaluation and ultimately choosing and deploying MIST. And so we're going to talk to him and get his take on some of the things he went through and what he learned in the process. So we'll have Chuck on board very soon. So as I mentioned, MIST is defining the new wireless network. More specifically, what we are doing is we are the actual first AI-driven wireless LAN. And what that brings to the equation is the ability to actually solve two key areas of interest. And Chuck's going to go into a little bit more detail because a lot of that dovetails with what he was doing. So the first thing is the ability to overcome what I like to refer to as mediocre Wi-Fi. Right? We've come to accept the fact that Wi-Fi is often unpredictable and unreliable. But perhaps most importantly, the biggest challenge with Wi-Fi today is that it's not very measurable. When someone walks on site and they have a bad wireless experience, the IT department is able to say, is the light green? Is the access point up? Is the network up? But you really don't know how that translates to a user experience. How long did it take the user to connect? What throughput are they getting? What is their roaming experience? So the first thing we wanted to solve is to make a more user-centric approach to Wi-Fi where you actually have that visibility into the end user experience. We'll talk about that more in a second, what that means. And again, Chuck's going to talk about how he was able to implement that in terms of Guilford's user base. The second area, though, is also how you go about and do Wi-Fi in terms of BLE, in terms of location services. So adding value on top of wireless is also a key thing right now, being able to do things like push notifications, being able to do turn-by-turn directions, being able to do location sharing, traffic analytics. The challenge to date is that it's been very difficult to do Bluetooth Low Energy services, primarily because they've relied on battery-powered beacons. Devices that are put on the wall every 25 to 30 feet, they can get knocked down, they have to be manually calibrated. They've been the single biggest thing holding location back to date. What MIST has been able to do is by virtualizing the location experience and moving into the infrastructure, you can actually now do high-grade, scalable location services without doing battery-powered beacons. So that's a key enabler for a variety of location services going forward. So real quickly, we get asked all the time, why is MIST kind of wading into deep waters with lots of established vendors? It's interesting in that, I liken what we're doing now similar to 2003. Intel came out with Centrino in 2003, and there's a big flurry of innovation around the Wi-Fi space around that. With lots of vendors that you've probably been looking at for your wireless LAN infrastructure, and folks that Chuck has looked at as well. Folks like Cisco with their wireless LAN controller group based on the Airspace acquisition, Aruba, some newer vendors like Ruckus, Aerohive, even cloud vendors like Meraki, which were the first generation cloud, where they took the controller, they virtualized, and they moved into distributed data centers. But one of the interesting things is that all those platforms were all built prior to 2007. They were built prior to the Amazon cloud, the modern cloud. They were built prior to the modern smartphone and the iPhone and the Android. In fact, they were built prior to AI really existing, becoming mainstream. So number one is we actually said, well, there hasn't been a lot of innovation in the last 10 years, so what can we do using the modern smart device, the modern cloud, the modern AI to bring Wi-Fi into the modern era? But secondly, I'd like to think that we're actually at an inflection point right now around Bluetooth, very similar to where we were in 2003. Where it's now a standard. Ever since Bluetooth 4.0 came out, Bluetooth Low Energy has been a standard and part of the Bluetooth standard, and we're now on 5.0. Apple supports iBeacon, Google supports Eddystone, so basically the phones are all ready, they have Bluetooth on them, they have a standard for communicating. Modern smart device users are used to location-based experiences using things like Google Maps. So if you can solve that beacon problem, the battery-powered beacon problem, which is what MIST does, we feel like there's an inflection point where now Wi-Fi, BLE, and even IoT are all coming together to build this new wireless network for better IT experiences and better end-user experiences. Our platform is called the MIST Learning WLAN, or Wireless LAN. We do sell access points that are deployed on premise. There's our AP family, which is a mix of Wi-Fi, BLE, and IoT. It ranges from outdoor devices, the AP61, to indoor devices, the AP41 and 21, as well as our BT family, which is Bluetooth only. So if you want to deploy Bluetooth on top of an existing wireless LAN, the BT11 is the platform for you. We're 100% operated and managed via the cloud, and it's a modern cloud. So again, instead of taking virtual controllers and moving it into distributed data centers, we actually looked at how LinkedIn and Amazon and Google and Netflix built their cloud using containers and microservices and Storm, Spark, Kafka for distributed processes, for high performance, for resiliency and protection against data loss. And that's how we built our cloud. And the secret sauce, which I'll talk about and Chuck will talk about as well, is the AI. How do we do things like actionable insight, do things like event correlation, service levels, dynamic packet captures for actionable troubleshooting, as well as high accuracy location. So on the Mist platform, we actually sell 3 services. There's our Wi-Fi assurance service, which is all about making Wi-Fi predictable, reliable, and measurable. There's our BLE engagement service, which is all about pushing information to users, primarily using applications on a smartphone. So pushing turn-by-turn directions, pushing proximity-based notifications like get your flu shot or advertising. And then lastly, it's tracking BLE-enabled assets, so wheelchairs, infusion pumps, elderly patients or elderly people to make sure they don't wander off-site, kindergartners to make sure they don't leave a facility unsupervised, or badges on employees to make sure in an emergency 911 situation, responders know where to go. Okay. I mentioned the Wi-Fi assurance service. Chuck's going to go into more detail here, but there's 3 primary things that makes our Wi-Fi solution really unique among the industry, aside from all the other basic wireless LAN features. One is we do have the ability to set, monitor, and enforce customizable service levels. So for example, you can say, I want everyone in a building to connect in 2 seconds or less, and then you can manage, monitor what percentage of the time am I hitting that, which users are not hitting that, are certain devices having problems. Or similarly, you can say, I want everyone to get 30 megas per second throughput. And I want to know not just who's getting that right now, but I want Mist to tell me using machine learning if all of my users wanted to get that as a service level, is that something I can meet? So this whole concept of service levels is something brand new and really lets you delve into what the user experience is with Mist. Second thing is the ability to get easy root cause analysis. So we literally are collecting over 100 states from every user every approximately 2 seconds. We then do big data analysis on that and use our machine learning to give you event correlation. So if someone calls up and says, I have a problem with my wireless network, we'll actually tell you, well, it was a wireless problem, or was it a wired problem, like your DHCP server didn't give an IP address, or your WAN was dropping packets, or do you have a device problem where actually your iPhones were potentially having an issue? So rather than having your wireless team chase their tail and try to recreate a problem, we'll tell you immediately what that problem is, and then we'll do trending analysis, again, to see is this a problem that's systematic? Is it reoccurring over time? Are certain types of devices or certain operating systems or applications causing these problems? So you have all that information at your fingertips. And the last thing is, if there is a major problem, we will actually detect it for you and automatically start a packet capture. So again, in the past, if someone had a problem, they called your help desk, you would have to deploy someone on site with packet sniffers to go and recreate that problem. With us, all that data you need is stored in the cloud and is accessed remotely. So no more truck rolls with the Mist solution. That's the Wi-Fi assurance piece. On the BLE piece, as we mentioned, it's all about eliminating the need for battery-powered beacons. The way we did that is we actually have a patented BLE antenna array that goes in our access points. There's literally 16 antenna elements that pepper an entire room with BLE signals. So the minute you walk into a Mist environment, you're automatically interfacing with our access points that are actually sending out these BLE signals. We then use machine learning in the cloud to constantly calculate and recalculate path loss formula and other information, so we're able to give 1 to 3 meter accuracy 90% of the time. And lastly, we have a concept known as virtual beacons that we patented. So if you do want to do geography-based, proximity-based notifications, all you need is a floor plan and Mist access points, and we'll know where the user is, and we can do geography-based notifications. So for example, we can welcome someone to a building. We can welcome them to a men's shoe department or a specific part of a hospital. That's all built into our system with our virtual beacons. Every single thing I mentioned is 100% programmable via open APIs, all the Wi-Fi assurance, and we have an open SDK for all the Mist BLE solutions. So we definitely take an API-first approach for programmability. So summarizing this real quickly, so it's all about moving wireless from a network-centric approach to one that's more user-centric, where it's built on the modern cloud for DevOps and SaaS agility, as well as web scale. We use enterprise-grade access points that bring Wi-Fi, BLE, and IoT all together in a single PoE-enabled infrastructure that's all managed via the cloud. And the secret sauce is all in the AI, in the machine learning to do event correlation, proactive operations, predictive recommendations, as well as high accuracy location services. The end game is a better IT experience, which Chuck is going to talk to, as well as a better end user experience. The end users have Wi-Fi that's more predictable and reliable, as well as more contextual user-based experience, location-based experiences using BLE. So that's the Mist solution in a nutshell. Now I'd like to bring on Chuck, so Chuck can talk a little bit about Guilford's experiences. So Chuck, welcome to the show. We appreciate that. Why don't you tell us a little about Guilford? I know Guilford's a special college based in North Carolina. Why don't you walk us through a little bit about the university?
Sure. Guilford College is founded in 1837 by the Religious Society of Friends, known as the Quakers. We opened with 25 male, 25 female students. Today our board of visitors has the same gender split. Our population is about 1,800 students and 450 faculty and staff. We are a very diverse group of individuals, and I view that part of what we do is we breed ethical leaders and practitioners, essentially through the core values of the institution, which they publicize in different things. You can see them on our website, guilford.edu, if you ever go look. Our property was part of the Underground Railroad during that point in time. We're a national liberal arts college, recognized by a number of folks, including the New York Times education editor included Guilford College in the colleges that change lives. So we end up with being a national college of liberal arts. So
nice.
That's
and the happens to be a beautiful place too. So
it's a beautiful town. We actually have 5 higher ed institutions within the town, so it's a very interesting place to visit.
Yeah,
we encourage people to
tell us about your environment there. Your wired and wireless environment, and what were some of your criteria and impetus for kind of doing a new wireless LAN refresh? Sure.
A few weeks ago, we were a Cisco AP vintage, mostly 2012. The AP that I picked up this morning was an Aeronet 1260 series, for those of you who know those. So in Jeff's drawing that he had a few minutes ago, that was Wi-Fi Gen 1. So in the campus core around that was a Catalyst 6509 that was put in with what they called a WISM blade, their Cisco wireless service module, about the same age, and that's what we use for managing that environment. So our last set of distribution switches for the campus came in around 2012 as well, though a number of them came in with 1 gig PoE, which was actually a good thing for us as we started looking at this. They were installed as part of a Cisco voice over IP environment. Today, our environment internally is 100% Mist, all Mist 41 APs, AP41s. We do have some current Meraki switches in place that have had to replace some of those things that didn't quite fit, because as you go through the bowels of a campus, you'll find all kind of things that you didn't realize you actually had.
Yeah. And so I know you guys were going through the refresh, and it was interesting. I know when we were chatting, you were talking about some of your criteria for doing an upgrade, and I think one of the key things you pointed out was simplicity. If I remember correctly, you only have about 2 people there that are actually on the IT staff, and you're using a lot of students. So why don't you talk through that a little bit? I thought that was interesting.
We have 2 people that I've assigned to networks, and one of them is essentially focused on the Wi-Fi and network switching. The other one's had to focus more on networking, wiring, and voice. So so part of what I wanted to be sure is be simple, because any campus today would like to think it is not an 8-to-5 campus, but it's hard to do much more than with one individual. So yes, we have one person that becomes our sort of network specialist in wireless and network switching in general. But part of what we wanted to be sure is that we had something that the small staff could deal with. They all wear multiple hats. We wanted to have our onboarding process for guests and campus constituents to be as easy as possible. Nothing's harder than people who can't get actually to your infrastructure. The solution had to be high quality. I didn't want a half wireless system. I wanted it really to be as, what people would have grown to expect. And, in reality, what they've grown to expect is what they have in their house when they're the only person on it. We needed to force good troubleshooting for our staff, analytics. In my view, that means service level monitoring. I wanted to be able to have good service levels with what we were doing. And if possible, I really wanted to catch a technology on its upswing. The last thing you ever want to buy in the technology world is something that's about to be replaced a year from now. And I didn't want to be in that situation.
You really got a pretty good life out of your existing Cisco wireless LAN. So
we've been able to squeeze them for a long time.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
But they are coming out from under support. They had to go away. So there was nothing else. I think you should be happy if you get 5 years of service out of a device.
Absolutely, yeah.
But we got way more than that out of most of our stuff.
Yeah. So why don't we walk through that a little bit? So you did an analysis. I know you looked at some of the folks. I know you're looking at the Gartner Magic Quadrant. You're looking at some other things. Walk us through, what was your process there, or what was your thinking in terms of what you saw in terms of the landscape?
Sure. I should say that part of what we did is we started long ago. We didn't actually have this same network because we wanted to. I started here in June 2016, and prior to that, the team had actually gathered and done some looking at pretty much all of the vendors here, actually with the exception of Mist. They had brought a number of them in, looked at them. They had talked about a number of different pieces with them and sort of learned what they were expecting to see and where they thought sort of the special features would be of each of the providers. Because somebody would have something that they viewed as a plus where somebody else wouldn't have that same plus. So last fall I went and kick-started this thing again with this team, and what we did was we sort of created a design process where we said, let's have our vendors look at 3 buildings, our student center, a residence hall, and a classroom building, and propose what they would put in it from a switch view as well as a wireless view. Mm-hmm. Because our wired infrastructure was getting long in the tooth. I wanted to be sure that it had that it was compatible with whatever we would do and would highlight it, not necessarily cut it down. And so that was why we were part of this piece. We went and looked at all those different pieces in this mix.
Okay. And so I know eventually you did make a decision that you wanted to move to the cloud. So yes. What was kind of the driving factor behind that, moving off premise where you were before to more of a cloud-based solution?
Obviously, part of what I needed to make sure of is that we were as reliable as I could be, as I could get upgrades in. We'd actually had to stop doing upgrades in our wireless world because we didn't have time necessarily to do them, as well as the infrastructure that we had to install ourselves to support it. So I wanted us to do the things that we do well versus the things that other people can do better. And there was a whole set of things that would come with that would be important as we're looking at them. In my view, the thing you show on the screen now, simplified operations become a key part of that. It has to be simple. If it's not, I can't be successful. There's too many things my people have to do in general, and I need to make sure that I have something that I can say is set up the same here as it might be somewhere else, with the exception of parameters that my support folks can look at as well.
Yeah. Okay. So that's maybe a good lead-in. So, so you mentioned that MIST wasn't in the initial thing. So why don't you tell us a little bit? How did MIST kind of come on your radar?
Let's get into it. It was actually I had a couple conversations with one of the trusted advisor folks of the consulting pieces, because I have to realize that I don't know everything. I have to go ask others who are watching the industry. And so I had one call where I talked about the different providers, and they helped us with some of our elimination of some of the folks in the mix. And then I was having a follow-up conversation with the same gentleman about something else, and he said, "Did you look at MIST?" And I said, "No, what's MIST?" And so I'm a cold call off your homepage.
Yeah, love that.
I went
Especially being a marketing guy, I love that.
Filled in my details and said, "Give me a call." I think I got a message back, and I called the person back at 8 o'clock in the morning, who happened to be on the West Coast. But she was very nice, and she got me back to the right people to talk to right away, and we started engaging in a pretty quick conversation.
Yeah, excellent. And I think you already highlighted some of the key areas in the last point, but it sounds like you like the history of the company, the ex-Cisco founders, et cetera, and some of the technology you felt was well positioned for the future.
Part of what you have to do with that genealogy of the company, or as you worded it here, is the people have to understand how to have done it. You sort of have to go through the mistakes once of knowing how an environment ought to be. And you could, if you could have the brightest engineers in the world, but if they haven't had the experience once, they're going to fail. So I view that as sort of part of the success that I'm expecting from all of this, is the understanding of pieces that fail. And as you said, there's strong Cisco history here. You should look that up yourselves, as folks as will, see who they are.
Because I actually was one of the marketing guys when WISM was created. So that was one of my babies after the aerospace acquisition. So it's a small world and a tight world around wireless. Let's shift gears a little bit. Let's get to your deployment. Why don't you walk us through? You said you were going to start with a couple buildings. It went from there. So why don't you walk us through what happened in terms of the deployment?
Sure. In reality, as MIST came to this place sort of late, we were actually sort of set with what we thought we might be doing, and I started saying, well, let's see if how many of those buttons MIST clicks off right away. And so we did. We clicked them off right away in terms of looking at it, and everything we were expecting to see, we were seeing. Then we, as we got to talking about the moving of this out from this small project, we essentially knew that the campus infrastructure as a whole really needed the change. And so what we were able to do is get a reasonable pricing structure in place, be able to put those numbers in front of the leadership of the institution and say, this case makes business case for us to do it all, and us to do it all now, and let's see where it goes. As you see, we started this summer, and we finished in 3 weeks.
Wow.
For the most part, there's always those few buildings that get in the way. The 5-minute piece there is really because we sat and measured it. If I'm going to put students out there, because my students were the ones who really went into the field and did this, my 2 network engineers were really showing them what to do, and then we turned them loose.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, one of the things that made it a little easier is you had the brackets in place from the existing APs, and you pretty much just
right. I didn't want to go through and do the remeasurement of wireless. We could have done that, but that would be a project that I thought would be never ending. Part of what we did with NIST is that, we'll look at these radios after they're in place, and we'll decide whether or not we need to readjust where things are. And then if we need to reshape it, we will.
Yeah.
But the hard sealing APs actually went into exactly the same slots as the Cisco stuff. We just popped one AP out and another one in. They weren't made for that. It was just one of those lucky pieces. And they don't have the lock-in button, so we had to think about how we wanted to deal with the risk of them actually falling out, because missed APs are heavy. They were much heavier than those 1260s that we had, and but even in the drop ceilings, the device, the installation piece was real quick. So all we had to do was deinstall the Cisco drop ceiling things, screw in the other one, and drop it in. We moved some of them.
Also, the extra hardware, that BLE antenna array has a little weight to it.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
It's not something that we're seeing a problem with any of the stuff. It's just something to know.
Yeah. And so I know a lot of our customers are able to really streamline the deployment using APIs and or the org templates. So it sounds like you were able to kind of do that as well, just kind of get a cut and paste type of environment.
Yep, it was sort of a cut from the ship list to the install list, and with the same configuration and go. That's about the way we put them in, and then you line up your directional pointing with the blue light where it is on the AP, and it made it pretty easy for getting all the pieces in play for it.
Yeah. So I didn't ask you this prior, but you can answer honestly. So was it easier or harder than you thought to deploy?
It was easier, because I really was expecting to have to take all of the hard sealing APs down, and rescrew all that back in. That was the really big savings of time. Yeah. And then the whole, I was expecting, once we'd made the choice of a cloud-based environment, that we were going to be able to cut and paste configurations pretty quickly.
Yeah.
People have gotten pretty good about the management of some of these devices in the last few years, but yours was just as clean or cleaner than anybody else's in that way.
Yeah, no, we appreciate that. So, okay, it's up and running. What was the initial reaction, both from your IT team and from the end users?
Well, part of the end user piece that I didn't want to do is I didn't go out and tell them I'm turning this over. I didn't want to rise problems to the surface. We kept the same SSIDs and then added one, because I added a guest ID. We had sort of cross-used the guest ID for two different purposes here. And so what I was doing was I wanted to create a new guest ID that was obviously a guest ID. Would you ever know if you walked on the campus and saw the SSID QuakerNet that was supposed to be the guest ID for the campus? Probably not.
Probably not, yeah.
But we had the QuakerNet, we had GC Secure, and so I went ahead and just added GC Guest. So now it's obvious that you're a guest of the campus, and it also was real easy, therefore, for people to see where they were connected, because if their SSID was showing GC Guest, they knew they were on one of the new APs with the same strength pieces and that kind of stuff.
Access, it was you're using a passphrase to connect, or I know we have social login. What's the main way that you guys
we're doing? Oh God, you're asking me a technical question, and I'm the wrong thing. I'm sorry. No, we're authenticating off of our Windows environment.
Okay, got it.
Through different pieces there, and I'll come up with the wrong specs. It's P.
It's okay. We can keep going. So
written there anywhere? MS Chap 2. So anyway, it's the idea for our GC Secure is for nobody to recognize anything other than better performance. For our QuakerNet, not recognize anything other than better performance, because that's also where people were putting the Xbox kinds of devices. The GC guest would be the piece that would be recognizable as a difference. And so, and in reality, we don't have to tell people how to do that. It's been clean, pretty clean in reality, seeing it go in.
So, and I know you guys had an interesting experience too, where you actually detected a problem, but it wasn't with the wireless network; it was with the wired network. Your DHCP issues. What was that all about?
The Internet of Things is a problem because these are half-written devices. They put their little baby Linux on them, and then they sort of go out the door, and people sort of expect them to work from that point on. But they don't necessarily expect them to work in every environment. And part of what we were finding is things that weren't doing the right kind of DHCP request, and then not accepting responses when they came back from them. The 8 alerts that you see in the upper right-hand corner of my screen there, that's exactly what that's all about, as we're still trying to get a set of thermostats working correctly.
Got it.
And so, but yeah, that's part of what we're seeing is that we've recognized a number of different problems there. Anytime you get visibility and abilities to drill in, you see more.
Yeah, it's funny. We the industry term is mean time to repair. We actually joke in the wireless space that we help with mean time to innocence, because everyone blames the Wi-Fi network, and if you can prove that the Wi-Fi network is innocent, something else like the wired DHCP or device, that's mean time to innocence is the term we use.
It's always the network, though. It doesn't really matter. It's always the network.
Fair enough.
Even if it's the workstation.
Yeah, it's true. So I mentioned service levels, and I know you've put some in place. So why don't you walk us through kind of some of the thresholds that you set up and what you're seeing today with those?
Actually, I took the defaults. These were the defaults as put them in play, because part of what I wanted to do is get myself a little bit of longitudinal data before I started mucking around too much.
Makes sense. Baseline.
Yep. Remember, we started this at the beginning of the fall semester. So we've been doing this a month. So we're just getting into the mix a little bit, seeing all those different pieces and starting to dig into it more. Actually, we've been spending a whole lot of time in that last 3% of the APs that had to change over.
Yeah.
Because you got to have the switch, you got to have the AP. It's in a house that's separate from everything else, and people can't figure out how the network actually got there. And you got your Wi-Fi extenders that are pointing to it. So our network team has spent more time on that by far than the rest of this stuff, and actually upset that he hadn't been able to get in and dig more into setting up some pieces for us.
And you did mention that you are collecting some interesting stats. So why don't you walk us through what are some of the reports or stats that you are pulling that you found most useful in that first month?
Well, for me to create a report to make sure that we had something that was good for showing here as well as elsewhere, this is really a 10-second report. I just went to the page and said, you point and click, pull some things around, and you get your reports. Part of what I wanted to do was show that at an educational institution, as probably the same as everybody else, if you offer Wi-Fi, what you're really seeing is edutainment video. That's really the big piece. So it may be educational, or it may be mostly Netflix. But those were a couple reports we just did very quickly by application. There's lots of different ways to look at that. The device over the analytics on the individual devices, just what I'm showing there. That's my cell phone, or one of my cell phones, and it essentially just shows you what you can see related to it around it. And pretty much any of these things like device types, manufacturers, those different pieces are things that we can be capturing data against and comparing multiple devices to see how well they do, which is, it's nice to know how many Xboxes you have on the campus and what those Xboxes are actually doing. And you can decide whether or not they're actually of value for the institution or not. But it has some good things that you can see with all these pieces and see where they're moving about, et cetera, as we're looking at stuff.
Yeah, and so that's actually interesting. So, I wanted to ask you about what's next, and I know you have a couple things you're looking at. One, you mentioned those Xboxes and those, IoT devices. So, why don't you walk through a little bit what's next? Personal WLANs, I know, is one of the things on your list, which addresses that. Location outdoor.
Yeah.
Why don't you talk about what you want to take?
Sure. The personal WLAN is, if you think of it as a concept, part of what I'm wanting to be able to do is make sure that people have sort of what they have in their houses, in their residence hall rooms. If I have an Apple TV, if I have an Xbox, if I have a Chromecast, I want those things to be able to work. Well, they have to sort of show on the local network. Well, if I can create a local network within the room for a student, that's a pretty good piece. And they can do their pieces that way as it's important to them. And one of the things I was kidding you about the other day was, if I have two people with Xboxes that are in separate residence halls, they could share a personal WLAN between those Xboxes, and now they're gaming with whatever the game of the week is in their world, tied together as if they were in the same room with one another.
And real quick, just by way of definition for folks that don't know it, what a personal WLAN lets you do is on a single SSID, you can put pre-shared keys on multiple devices. So basically you can secure segmentation of user groups and devices without having to do multiple SSIDs. So, and like you said, a group of users in a dormitory can all share their Xboxes or their Chromecast without other users or other students seeing that.
And we're talking about what that might also do in the classroom. Can we do the same thing in the classroom, and what might that mean to us? How might that live together as we're dealing with trying to use local classroom education pieces? Active learning is an important part of what we do at Guilford, and if we can put that in play for their electronic devices, that's a win for us.
Cool. Yeah, I like that. So obviously you have outdoor environments. The outdoor AP I think is interesting there, but perhaps most interesting to maybe go into detail some of the location. We mentioned that those APs are a little heavier. They got the BLE built into it. What are some of your thoughts on how you might be able to bring location into the equation at Guilford going forward?
Well, part of what you're always looking for is how to measure student success. It's as a student we probably all know that a student who spends more time in the classroom is actually probably going to be more successful than one who's never on campus. But there might be other measurement pieces that we might be able to do by knowing where people are. If we can pull or push some of that data out, that might be very interesting to us. How much time are they spending in the library? Are they spending it on this floor kind of thing? Where are they spending it peer groups? Are we seeing loners, or are we seeing people get together? And that can be individual or that can be grouping. You of course want to be careful with how you share that data, but part of what you're looking at is how can we build the best success for a student, and what does that take? So we're looking at things and ways to look at that in general.
Yeah, we've had other higher eds too doing wayfinding across campus, and self-guided tours is also something interesting, right? They didn't want the student walking backwards experience versus you being able to do your own personalized tour. So it sounds like you guys have a lot at your disposal. Maybe one final question before we go to the questions that are coming in from the audience is, if you had to give advice to someone else who's going through the same thing, Chuck, what would you tell them? What's your best practice advice here?
Start out with understand what you want out of your wireless world, what's there, what's important for your environment. For me, the the WLANs was important. It may not be as important in certain other environments, but I want to have that kind of piece. Understand that was actually one of the triggers a couple years ago that people got excited about because somebody else had something that was close to that, or they thought might get to that. And I thought, oh, well, that's great. This is now more than we were expecting when we came into this, but it's key for us. That also drives the second point, which was that knowledge that wireless engineer or network engineer had picked up here as he was looking multiple times, gave him an opportunity to see things over time and what that really meant. As we were looking at switch and wireless together, we thought that wasn't something I originally thought we would do, but then when we started seeing the age, we saw it as becoming important. And looking at them together showed us challenges with the different vendors. Who would you actually partner with for both? Because Mist offers one piece, but then Mist has to say who their favorite switch provider is and who they feel like they are most comfortable with moving in a forward direction. Are you limiting yourself if you look at different things? So I'd say education for you is sort of the key. That I thought was one of our big things there. And I should mention one of the things that I didn't realize was a benefit of choosing two different providers, but ended up being that way. We chose Meraki switches and Mist APs. Mm-hmm. Both of them have some abilities to identify devices. We've already found that in some cases, one would identify a device and the other one wouldn't. Mm-hmm. And it's vice versa, the same thing for the other set. So it's given us more information by actually not being the same.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Which I didn't expect, but it's something we've found out just through the experience of looking at it.
It does go back to the best of breed notion, right? Best of breed products often give you advantages, but also, like you said, multi-vendor often has other advantages as well. Cool. And I'm going to highlight one other best practice advice that you mentioned to me in our pregame warm-up is that if you're an education person, you maybe want to start a little bit earlier in the summer.
Oh, yes. All construction is done during the summer in institutions, and when we put in our pilot site, we put it into a place that was under construction. What a horrible thing to do.
Yeah.
So we actually pulled back from that and went and stuck it in a residence hall that was occupied for the summer, which was a pretty quick installation, and then we were able to actually show our pilot was actually something successful, and that allowed us to then pull the trigger on going the whole way, or as I've been saying, all in the Mist.
Very, very cool. So, folks on the line, we're at the end of this thing, but we'll do a Q&A. So, if you haven't submitted a question, please do so now. I have Mary Kate on my team is looking at this right now. So, Mary Kate, I know some have come in already, so maybe you can start asking some of these questions.
Yeah, we do have quite a few, and they're all about different things. So we'll just start with this. One person wants to know if you measured, Chuck, before and after the speed of your wireless network, and did it go up?
I didn't have a good way to measure it before, so it was really, in reality, that was one of those things that was a thing of feel. Okay, the feel is yes, it's better, and yes, it's faster. But since I couldn't really see it beforehand well enough to measure it, except by going and doing things like connecting to a speed test site and just running it, which is a measure, but it's generally not a very good measure. Though I do have people using it all the time to tell me how well that their stuff is actually doing. On the wired and the wireless side.
Yeah, but it's the benefit of shifting from a network-centric approach to user-centric. Now you have that data, so.
Yeah.
All right, so someone else is asking if they understand you replaced the Cisco APs with Mist APs, then you did not then only needing to do a site survey or heat maps later when you've, let me read this first. Yeah, so I guess the question that they're asking is about what sorts of site surveys did you have to do, and what sorts of data did you get for coverage, and then are you anticipating adding more missed APs?
I actually think I have more missed APs than I needed to cover my campus, but I also viewed that as we're looking at some differing structures where we may not have had wireless in general, we didn't do any site surveys before we started because we viewed that if we went in and site surveys you have to do when you have usage and you're measuring the usage pieces. So if I did it in the summer when I'm low on students, it's really not a good time to do it. If I do it during exams, that's not a good time to do it. So you got to be very careful about when you do your measurement. Students like to come out at night. They don't like to come out during the day. So if you're doing it in residence hall, you need to sort of be doing it in the evening during maximum time. So we felt it was more important to go with what we had and then look at how we might adjust it once we needed to.
Great. All right, Chuck, I've got another one for you. Were there any other essential Wi-Fi tools that you were using during the campus-wide deployment?
No. We were not.
Okay. Very succinct.
I just didn't have it. We didn't have anything else we were doing there.
All right, so I have somebody here, and they're also working on a student housing project, and they're very interested in our WLAN grouping, or what we call personal WLANs. And so they want to know, what they're concerned about is actually kind of like troubleshooting calls, students calling at 2 a.m. saying, hey, I want to get on my friend's Xbox. So the question is, what are your plans? Do you have these issues, and what are for support calls, and then, what are your plans for best practices once you roll this out?
Well, I will. I'm not going to have a 24/7 help desk, so I'm not going to try to do that. Part of what I did is, when we did the guest setup was all Mist. That's all being done in the Mist world. I'm expecting before it's over with, because Mist is still early in their development, that they're going to develop a way for this to be user provisioned. It sort of has to be in the.
That is correct.
And so as it is user provision, then the students connect with their devices, they get their keys, and then they stick their keys in different places. Obviously, there are going to be challenges related to that. As simple as we can make it, the better we're going to be. But I think that's part of what I'm expecting is.
That is
much of that.
You're exactly right. That is where we're going, where students or people in a hotel room or whatever have the ability to put in their own pre-shared keys and set up their own groups. So that's exactly right. So that's one of the things that makes it really powerful.
Mm-hmm. All right. And I'm actually very excited about these personal plans. They're amazing. All right. So someone else is asking if you have right now, Chuck, any devices plugged into the IoT ports on the Mist APs, and how are you using them?
No, I don't. I'm real interested in hearing about examples that people might be using in that world and what might be a good thing. I knew that we were actually thinking about how we might use that port and also the Ethernet port that comes off the back of it as well. But right now I was trying to get the Wi-Fi pieces in place and then start thinking about those pieces.
Yeah, I can maybe chat about that a little bit because I didn't address it in my pitch. The IoT stuff's interesting. We're seeing some interesting use cases in terms of things that folks want to do. So we have had some folks want to tie thermostats in conference rooms or meeting rooms, so they know who's exactly in the room. They can help people find the right room. Then once they're in there, they can adjust the temperature to what they like. That's one example. We have a mall that's actually looking at tying defibrillators to security cameras. So if someone uses the defibrillator, they can track it and where it goes using location, and then turn on the security camera for recording it for insurance purposes or to notify EMTs. That's an example. We've even seen it for asset visibility. People using, in this is more healthcare, but being able to track an infusion pump, and it's difficult to figure out which room it's in if it's right next to a wall. So tying in with motion sensors to figure out exactly which room a key device is. So those are some of the different things we're seeing with IoT. I'm sure there's a lot more out there. Like you said, Chuck, I'd love to hear from folks as to what their use cases are. But the fact of the matter is, since there is a port on the access point and it's aggregated with Wi-Fi and BLE, there's potentially a lot you can do. We're excited about that.
Yeah. And following up on that, I'm seeing a location question, which is, do you recommend using Wi-Fi or the BLE that you were talking about for location?
Yeah, maybe I'll tackle that one. So we use BLE for location. I think the industry's been trying to do Wi-Fi for, I know the industry's been trying to do Wi-Fi for about 10 years. Just really hasn't taken off. Very expensive, very difficult to do, whereas Bluetooth is a technology. It's on everyone's phones. It's a standard. And as long as you can get rid of the battery-powered beacons, which we did, there seems to be no limit to moving it to a scalable solution. So that's what we're focusing our energies on.
Yeah, and maybe can you give an example of how someone's using location on a higher campus?
Yeah, so Stanford Law is an example. They're doing wayfinding on campus. We have other folks. Bowdoin University is doing it for their museum tour and some other stuff on that. So when you're standing in front of a work of art, it will actually notify you what that piece is, do some translations, et cetera. So those are some examples for higher ed that we're doing, and it extends well beyond that.
Okay, good. And then Chuck, I have a question for you here. How many people are manning your help desk, and has cloud provided any benefits on this front?
We're a small help desk. We actually have one permanent full-time person and one part-time person. We run sort of an 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and then 8 to 5 on Friday. And then I put about, I think I have 20 students right now that we've hired because they do help desk, they do field support, they do all those different pieces. But really what we did is we put the MIST and the Meraki consoles up so that they can actually see activity things as they're occurring. So if somebody actually spots it, then that's great. It's also set so that the customers see it when they walk into the help desk, so that they're actually getting a confirmation that we actually are providing a good wireless environment to them. Is it helping them? All of the questions around guest access went away because guest access just became real simple. And that all being run in the MIST environment, I think I said earlier, but it's all based on telephone, number, SMS, and the team that you're working with, the provider that you have.
Okay, great. All right, so somebody is asking if you can go into greater detail about what other cloud Wi-Fi vendors you evaluated prior to choosing MIST.
If you were to roll back to the slides to earlier, it was we primarily looked at Meraki, though we looked at what cloud Wi-Fi with part of the AeroNet offering can be the same, can be cloud oriented, and hang on a second, let me go back to my picture because I'm drawing a blank on some names.
Oh, okay, we go back up. There you go.
Aruba. I don't remember that. Aruba had some abilities to do some of that. They were offering on-prem or off-prem stuff.
Cool. Good.
Good. Yeah, I think that's all the questions we have. But if you do have any more questions, feel free to reach out to us at info@mist.com. And then Jeff and Chuck, I'll let you finish up.
Thanks, Mary Kate. Chuck, I really appreciate you coming on here and talk about your experiences. I found it informative. Hopefully everyone else out there did, and we're excited that you're a new MIST customer, and we think there's some exciting times ahead. Everyone else, thank you for joining us. And again, please, if you have any follow-up questions, just email info@mist.com. The recording will be available online, hopefully by the end of this week. And so if you want to re-listen, please go ahead and do that. Again, thanks everyone for joining us. Take care.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.